Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the federal indictment of Donald Trump over his attempts to overturn the 2020 U.S. presidential election? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, review key aspects of the indictment, then offer my analysis. Donald Trump served as the 45th President of the United States starting in 2017. He ran for re-election, but was defeated by Joe Biden. Donald has been the focus of a few criminal investigations. In March of 2023, he was indicted in the state of New York on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. This was in connection to the Stormy Daniels hush money incident. This was the first time any current or former president in U.S. history had been charged with a crime. In June 2023, Donald was the target of a federal indictment related to the handling of government documents after his presidency. He was charged with failing to return classified documents that he removed when he left the White House and obstructing efforts made by the government to retrieve the documents. This was the first federal indictment of a former U.S. president. On August 1, 2023, Donald Trump was indicted for attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. The charges are mostly connected to actions that Donald took while he was president. Essentially, the indictment said that Donald Trump falsely claimed that the results of the 2020 election were rigged. He tried to convince lawmakers, federal officials, his supporters, and even rioters to overturn the election. Donald was charged with 4 counts. Number 1, conspiracy to defraud the United States. This charge applies to Donald repeatedly spreading false claims about the election while knowing that they were not true and attempting to illegally discount legitimate votes. Number 2, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. This charge is connected to Donald organizing to disrupt the electoral vote certification in January 2021. Number 3, obstruction of and attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. This charge applies to Donald's efforts to block the official certification proceeding in Congress. And number 4, conspiracy against rights. This charge is for attempting to oppress, threaten, and intimidate people in the right to vote in an election. There are 6 uncharged and unnamed alleged conspirators listed in the indictment. The most serious charge against Donald Trump carries up to 20 years in prison. These charges are really about the false claims that Donald Trump made and his level of awareness about those claims. This case comes down to this: did Donald know that he was making false claims when he made them? The government is arguing that Donald did know. There were people who repeatedly told him that his claims were untrue, including many Republicans, and he deliberately disregarded the truth. Nobody knows what Donald's defense strategy is going to be. There are a few possibilities. For example, he could argue that he was within his First Amendment right to make false claims, or he could argue that he didn't know his claims were false. Maybe he received some bad advice. One thing that really stands out about the indictment is how many lies Donald Trump told. Here are just a few of them. Donald falsely claimed that fraud changed the outcome of the election and that he actually won. He often referred to the election as stolen. Donald lied when he said that the Justice Department had identified significant concerns that may have affected the outcome of the election. Donald was deceptive when he said thousands of ballots were cast in the names of dead people in Georgia. He falsely claimed that there had been a batch of votes that mysteriously appeared in Detroit, Michigan. Donald lied when he said that there were tens of thousands of double votes in Nevada. He falsely claimed that Pennsylvania had over 200,000 more votes than voters. Donald promoted a false conspiracy theory that voting machines had stolen votes from him. He tried to deceive people by saying that he had won every state by hundreds of thousands of votes. And Donald falsely claimed that Mike Pence had the power to reject Joe Biden's electoral votes. Mike Pence told Donald Trump that he did not have the constitutional or legal right to do this. Trump allegedly responded, quote, "You're too honest," unquote. Legal experts have weighed in on the indictment. Many believe it spells big trouble for Donald Trump, especially considering the case will be tried in Washington, D.C., where there are a large number of Democrats. A few legal experts believe that Donald may be able to get some traction by arguing that he was within his First Amendment rights. Now moving to my analysis. As I mentioned, this case comes down to Donald Trump's state of mind. What did he actually believe? Did he know that his false claims were false, or did he believe that the election was stolen? Here's how I conceptualize this case. There are only three possibilities as far as Donald's state of mind when he allegedly committed the offenses. Number one, he was just plain lying. That is, he knew that what he was saying was untrue. His actions were intentional. Number two, Donald was delusional. That is, he possessed a fixed false belief and never understood that his statements were not true. Number three, he was lying under the influence of denial. That is, he was unable to accept the truth. If Donald was just plain lying, then it seems pretty likely that he will be found guilty. If he was delusional, in theory, he may be found not guilty because he would have actually believed that his false claims were true. If Donald was in denial, then I think the jury could go either way. I don't know what they would do, but they would probably still convict him. Juries typically do not have much sympathy for any defense related to personality. Let's take a look at the factors involved with each of the three major theories about this case, starting with the theory that Donald was deliberately lying. There is quite a bit of evidence to support the idea that Donald Trump deliberately lied. For example, he made numerous statements which were untrue. He had plenty of time to think about those statements and yet repeated the same false claims. Donald has demonstrated the ability in the past to distinguish truth from lies. Therefore, he should have been able to recognize when he was being deceptive. Donald appeared to be the source of the lies, and the deception was self-serving. Donald clearly wanted to remain president, and he was willing to do anything to achieve that goal. Moving to the theory that Donald was delusional, a delusion is a fixed false belief indicative of an abnormality in the affected person's content of thought. Delusions are strongly associated with mental disorders. For example, brief psychotic disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and major mood disorders like major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder. I am not aware of any evidence supporting the theory that Donald has any of these mental disorders. Delusions typically have an absurdity or bizarreness that is obvious to observers. Donald's lies are absurd, but they're not really bizarre. It is rational for a politician to believe in winning an election. Many politicians believe that they really won when they actually lost. It's not like he was saying that alien lizard humanoids were casting votes for his opponent, although alien reptiles are known for supporting environmentalists. Delusions are not necessarily connected to external circumstances. Donald's lies came up after he lost the election. Delusions do not typically serve a person's needs. If a delusional belief could magically come true, it would often be bad news for the person who had the delusion. Like, they are not happy about the content of the delusion. For example, if a person had a delusion about the FBI watching them, they are not thrilled about being under surveillance. It is adverse to their will. Donald Trump, on the other hand, would be happy if his false claims were true. As far as factors supporting the idea that Donald was delusional, a person with a delusion cannot be convinced that the delusion is incorrect. They are absolutely convinced the delusion is real. One could argue that Donald is absolutely convinced and is not amenable to logic. Delusions often have a persecutory or paranoid component, like a person believes that others are out to get them. Donald does appear to believe in some massive conspiracy against him. Moving to the last theory, Donald Trump was in denial. The concept of denial is pretty popular in the world of mental health counseling. I have seen many people in denial throughout the years. Denial is when someone cannot accept the truth. It is often referenced when talking about substance use. but it happens under a wide variety of circumstances. Some researchers believe that denial does not exist. Perhaps they are in denial about denial. To them, it simply represents intentional deception, but most conceptualize denial as a defense mechanism that does exist. The idea behind the concept is that denial slows down how rapidly negative information is processed. People can't handle too much bad news at one time. Denial can stop them from getting overwhelmed. It prevents people from having to accept the truth all at once and gives them time to process and contemplate. They can integrate the negative information into their lives. Without denial, a person could have an erratic and drastic response to any number of adverse events like rejection or failure. Denial is actually a good thing in limited quantities, but it can become maladaptive if it stays in place for a long period of time. Denial has a strong association with narcissism. One could argue that Donald Trump's behavior is highly consistent with being narcissistic. For example, he is grandiose, arrogant, condescending, envious, self-centered, vindictive, petty, has a sense of entitlement, and is without empathy. With that in mind, it makes sense that he would find himself in denial. Perhaps the failure of losing the election was just too much for Donald Trump to handle. He needed to believe that he was more popular than he actually was. It was so offensive to him to be rejected by the American people that his denial set in immediately and will never dissipate. One could argue that his denial is really like a low-grade, permanent delusion. As I mentioned, I don't know what a jury would make of a defense based on denial. In my opinion, if Donald Trump was in denial, he would still be guilty. When considering the three main theories in this case, I think the most likely theory is that Donald Trump was in denial. The next most likely would be that he was simply being deceptive, and the least likely would be he was in a delusional state. I believe that he is guilty. In my opinion, Donald Trump has never let the truth stand in his way. He only cares about his feelings, his legacy, and his popularity. If the truth supports his desires, then he will speak the truth. If it doesn't, then he will deceive. Donald depends on an audience to validate his self-worth. He runs away from feelings of inferiority and failure. Now moving to my final thoughts. Donald Trump may have been in denial about his failure to get elected, but this did not give him the authority to engage in a conspiracy. He could have simply been in denial privately, without dragging the entire country into his quest to protect his ego. He jeopardized the peaceful transfer of power and, in my opinion, should go to prison. The case of Donald Trump once again illustrates how narcissism can lead to danger. Narcissists can perform many jobs, sometimes quite effectively, but they should never be granted authority over other people. Narcissists can say everything right and pretend that they are interested in altruistic goals, but in the end, they will do anything to satisfy their own needs. At the time making this video, Donald Trump is once again running for president. Will he pardon himself if he gets elected? Maybe. But if he keeps getting indicted at this rate, it will take him the entire 4 years just to complete all the paperwork. Those are my thoughts on the federal indictment of Donald Trump. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.